I'm going to start with panning my audience. And then we will start the speech. Have you ever climbed a set of stairs to only reach the top and find yourself a little dizzy and out of breath? If so, you may have felt the effects of low oxygen in your blood. And this effect actually draws up to 500 Olympic athletes every year here to train in Colorado Springs. You see, when the human body is at high altitude, it works harder to perform the same tasks than at sea level. High-level athletes choose to live, work, and train at altitude to make themselves more competitive when traveling and competing at lower elevations. Today we will discuss just how high is high altitude, what effects high altitude has on the body, and why does training in high altitude make athletes more competitive. So high altitude can be defined in a couple of different ways. Rick Curtis, the director of the Outdoor Action Program at Princeton University, he actually says that this blue area, 8,000 to 12,000 feet, is high altitude. Anywhere in the yellow, from 12 to 18,000 feet, the green, is considered to be very high altitude, and the yellow at 18,000 feet and above is extremely high altitude. So sports medicine defines it just a little bit differently, and actually Dr. Ben Levine found that high altitude is 7,000 feet and above, which is shown here in the pink, and low altitude in the purple is anything below 4,000 feet. Looking at the graph, we can see that Mount Everest is extremely high altitude. The highest human habitation, which is actually in Peru, is at 16,732 feet. Pikes Peak is here at 14,000 feet, and Colorado Springs is way down here at 6,035 feet. So, within these definitions, Colorado Springs is not technically considered to be high altitude. However, Julie Brock reported that for every 1,000 feet you ascend, a loss of 3% oxygen in the blood occurs. So this is only one of the many changes that high altitude causes in the body. One change that Curtis found is that low oxygen in the blood results in the body's rate of breathing increasing to make up for that lower oxygen level. So this increased breathing raises the oxygen content in the blood, but not to levels found at sea level. Another effect of high altitude is a lot more well known, that being altitude sickness. Travelers' Health defines it as nausea, headaches, extreme tiredness, a lack of appetite, and vomiting. So this sounds pretty similar to a hangover, but in extreme cases this can be very dangerous. So if a person is suffering from extreme altitude sickness, continues to have symptoms worsen while resting at the same altitude, they actually risk serious illness or death unless they descend immediately. Another change reported to the body by Andrew J. Peacock is that low oxygen in the blood has growing effects on the functioning of the central nervous system, and this can lead to cognitive impairment, which in this case is confusion from the subject not having enough oxygen reaching the brain. Many accidents that happen at Mount Everest are actually due to cognitive impairment. And even more disturbing is that this may be irreversible even once you descend to sea level. Even with these possible extreme changes to the body, many Olympic athletes choose to train at high altitude to compete at the highest of levels. Now, why would they do this? Dr. Levine says that breathing that less oxygenated air makes physical activity more difficult. Training in high altitude but competing at those lower elevations translates to a natural boost to the muscles when additional oxygen is available. This strategy is a preferred method of training for many high-level athletes. But why do so many Olympic athletes train here in Colorado Springs when it's not even considered to be high altitude? Well, at 6,035 feet, it is actually considered to be a little bit like high altitude, or relatively high altitude, when you consider that there's 18% less oxygen reaching your blood. Plus, at the Olympic Training Center here in Colorado Springs, it has a high-altitude training center within it. So according to the OTC, this high-altitude training center actually allows athletes to train in different climate conditions, which includes high humidity, extreme temperatures, and high altitude. So today we discovered that high altitude is defined as at least 7,000 feet, but that for every 1,000 feet ascended, a loss of 3% oxygen in the blood occurs. We learned that high altitude can cause altitude sickness, which can be life-threatening in extreme cases. And we also discovered that some effects of high altitude may have permanent, lasting damage, including cognitive impairment. So despite these risks, many Olympic athletes choose to train here in Colorado Springs to make them more competitive at those lower elevations. Plus, we now know why we have to take that extra second at the top of the stairs. I'm going to show my audience one more time. Thank you, ladies, for being here. Kind of a blur. They are here.